that Constitution, that pesky Constitution we were discussing in the Bill of Rights, and how some now on the left want to use it, the 14th Amendment in particular, to stop, some half of the country from getting the candidate on the ballot that they seem to prefer. Trump is overwhelmingly leading in his battle to become the Republican nominee. And now the last-ditch effort seems to be get him off of there by using the 14th Amendment to say you can't run for president. You can't even run. You can't be president if you engaged in an insurrection or provided aid to someone who did. I know you don't believe in this. I love the Dersh Show. I listen to it all the time. But explain for the listening audience that isn't up to speed how they are using the 14th Amendment here to make this argument.
Well, it's an effort to disenfranchise not only Americans who want to vote for Donald Trump. I insist on the right to vote against him for the third time. That's an important right, too. I want Donald Trump defeated on the merits in a fair and open election. I don't want him disqualified. First of all, the 14th Amendment was designed to prevent people who fought in the Civil War from assuming office. By the way, not only the presidency, but mayor, city council, any position under state, federal, or city law. And it doesn't only apply to people running, it applies for people sitting in office. So it's a way of circumventing even the impeachment provision. You could use it against President Biden and say that there was an insurrection by him opening the borders in the South. And Professor Lawrence Tribe, who has been pushing this so hard, he says it's self-enforcing. You don't need a Supreme Court decision. You don't need a district court decision. You don't need an accusation. You don't need a conviction. All you need is Lawrence Tribe to say, I think it was an insurrection, and therefore he can't run. If he can persuade secretaries of state, some of which are elected, some of which are appointed, some of whom are Republicans, some of whom are Democrat, if he can persuade enough of them to take him off the ballot, it's the end of democracy for the 2024 election. It means that people don't get to vote for and against those candidates who the majority of the people in primaries have decided to put on the ballot. It's the most undemocratic, anti-American tactic for getting Trump. I wrote a book called Get Trump. Every effort has been made to get Trump. They're bringing criminal prosecutions, some of which are stronger than others. New York is the weakest. The Florida perhaps is the strongest. That's different because there at least there's a due process, a judicial safeguard. But this 14th Amendment thing, self-enforcing, it means anybody can take anybody off a ballot if they think they engaged in an insurrection such as might have occurred after the George Floyd killing in parts of the West when there were attempts to take over federal buildings and state buildings and damage to property. Who knows what an insurrection rebellion is outside of the context of the Civil War? We knew it back then, but today it's become a metaphor for protests you don't approve of, not for protests you approve of. It's so
just in case you think, just lest our audience think this is just some dream of some liberal law professors, it's not. There's a push underway in several swing states right now to get the secretaries of state to remove Trump from the ballot to make sure he cannot appear on the ballot. In Arizona, the Secretary of State, a Democrat, said he doesn't have the authority to bar Trump from the ballot, but the question about Trump's eligibility is not settled, so leaving the door open. In Michigan, the Democratic Secretary of State recently said there are valid legal arguments being made for keeping the former president off the ballot, and that it's something that they're discussing. She is discussing right now with election officials in other states. There are pushes underway in Georgia, in New Hampshire, in Colorado. In Colorado, they filed a lawsuit. That's another way of going about getting this to happen. Challenging whether he has the right to stay on the ballot by this left-wing group. That case that was just filed in a state court was removed to federal court by Team Trump, saying this is a federal issue and ought to be decided in a federal court. So we'll see how that plays out. But there are active pushes underway in, of course, the critical swing states. Those are the ones that really matter, to keep him off the ballot. This could cost him the election no matter whether he defeats all of the criminal cases against him, Alan.
Well, it's not a matter of keeping him off the ballot and denying him the right to be president. What's most important is denying us the right to determine who the next president is and leaving it to a bunch of elitist law professors, secretaries of state, and judges. Those are not the people who the Constitution allocated the responsibility for electing the president. It's voters and the Electoral College. If you want to change that, if you want to change our system into a system where judges make that decision as secretaries of state, amend the Constitution. But under the current Constitution, we get to decide who the next president is. And it's not up to some interpretation of the 14th Amendment. The 14th Amendment was so clearly designed to apply to people who fought in the Civil War in the South. And that's why it was self-enforcing, because everybody knew who fought for the South. They were proud of it. They were going around in their Confederate uniforms. They were forming organizations like Daughters of the Confederacy, Sons of the Confederacy. They were celebrating the Confederacy. Nobody was denying that they fought in the Confederacy. That's why it was self-enforcing. But beyond that limited use, if you take it now to 2024, how do we determine what's an insurrection? It can't be decided by secretaries of state. There has to be a process.
Right. If they think this, I mean, seriously, if they think this, that it's self-executing, and once you engage in what, quote, an insurrection, which in their definition means challenging the election results, refusing to accept that one has lost when one has lost, because again, Trump is not the one who stormed the Capitol. He did not do that. Right. What he did was try to challenge election results in every way, shape, and form he could think of. Then I guess President Kennedy engaged in an insurrection where he had the alternate slates of electors for Hawaii. Stacey Abrams, who they ran again in Georgia, she never should have been allowed to run again for office. And yet, I'll tee it up for you, Alan, here is your old pal, Lawrence Tribe, professor at Harvard. Alan and Tribe do not like each other. And Judge Michael Luttig, who is a conservative judge, who a lot of lefties are very now excited about because he's from the Fourth Circuit Court of Appeals, or that's where he sat. And he's taking the same position. But don't forget, just because you're a more conservative justice or person doesn't mean you don't hate Trump, okay? Doesn't mean you wouldn't do everything in your power to get him. Here they are together talking about this scheme.
The original meaning of Section 3 disqualifies the former president from ever holding the presidency again.
The disqualification clause operates all by itself. This clause says that no one who did what Donald J. Trump obviously did, and he doesn't really deny it. He plays games with what we call it, but he doesn't deny. Well, in the first instance, it is the officials who decide whether his name can be put in nomination. Usually it is the Secretary of State who must make that call. But whichever way Secretary of State goes, that case will go to court. And because the issue is so momentous, it will end up in the Supreme Court of the United States.
Now, I should say, I shouldn't impute, I'll give you the floor, but I should not impute hatred to Michael Luttig. I have no idea how he feels about Trump. As people are sort of like, well, he's a conservative. It's like, well, you do have to dig a little bit deeper when it comes to Trump to figure out somebody's political positioning. Go ahead, Alan.
Of course, but the irony is that they claim the Secretary of State decides who's on the ballot. Of course, that's not the law. The people decide who's on the ballot. The Secretary of State performs the administrative function. That's exactly the argument that Trump was trying to make with Vice President Pence. He was saying the vice president decides how the electoral vote should be counted. And the same Luttig and Tribe said, that's an insurrection, getting the vice president to play a role as to the counting of the votes, and yet they're doing the same thing. They're saying that the Secretary of State decides who's on the ballot. No, primaries decide who's on the ballot. Delegates decide who's on the ballot. We have a process for deciding who's on the ballot. The Secretary of State just performs the ministerial task of putting his name in print and printing the ballots. But to say that the Secretary of State decides who's on the ballot is the same as saying the Vice President decides how the electoral vote should be counted. They're both invitations to lack of democracy.
I always wanted to grow my own vegetable garden, and now I have a Lomi, and it's changed the way I think about food waste. Lomi transforms my garbage into gold at the press of a button. It's fun. Lomi is a countertop electric composter that turns food scraps into dirt in under 4 hours. Now I'm loving the composting. Plus, it's made cooking at home even more fun. Well, it's made it fun, period. It wasn't fun. Now it's a little fun. There's no food rotting in the garbage, smelling up the kitchen. Thanks to Lomi, you have to take out the trash far less frequently. You can turn your waste into nutrient-rich dirt that you can then feed to your plants, your lawn, or your garden. All your food scraps, your plant clippings, even those leftovers in the back of the fridge can go boom into the garden, helping grow more nutritious food right in your own backyard. Whether you want to stay making a positive environmental impact or you just want to grow a beautiful garden, Lomi is perfect. Head to lomi.com/MK, LOMI.com/MK. Use the promo code MK to get $50 off your order. That's $50 off when you head to LOMI.com/MK. Use the promo code MK at checkout for your discount. Turn your food waste into dirt with the press of a button thanks to Lomi. Use the code MK to save $50. Lomi.com/MK. Hey, thanks so much for watching. If you like what you just saw, hit the subscribe button for more clips and full episodes.